Well, thank you first of all for that kind introduction, and thank you for having me here at Rachel Carson Center. It's a wonderful opportunity to pursue my work. And thank you all for coming today, so shortly before Easter and with this wonderful weather. Let me start my talk with a thought experiment. Would you please think of your favorite places in nature where you like to go hiking or cycling or just be, watching, listening, feeling, enjoying it all. Now imagine that all these places no longer exist, that natural beauty has gone extinct. How would that affect the quality of your life? Would it affect it only marginally, or not at all, or essentially? Let me deepen this thought experiment by giving you two examples. The first one is a set of pictures. Alle Jahre wieder saust der Presslufthammer nieder. It's not that easy to translate it. Every year again, the jackhammer comes. Alle Jahre wieder saust der Presslufthammer nieder, painted by Jörg Müller. Can you guess what these pictures represent? They are on the back of your handout. Can you guess what these pictures represent? Which country, which year? Can anybody guess? Who doesn't know it? Because it's quite famous, but can anybody guess? The first picture, which country? It's all the same, but which country, which year? What would you guess? Hello?
It's Germany.
Germany is close, yes. Switzerland, yeah. Switzerland.
Netherlands? The Netherlands?
No, it's Switzerland.
Switzerland.
It's Switzerland. And which year? The first picture, and then the second, the third, the fourth. Which year would you think the first picture represents, and then the fourth, the last picture?
1900, the first?
The first?
1920 or first one?
Yeah, it's a bit later, 50s, 53. And the last one?
1960?
Yeah,
70?
Yeah, right. It's the early 70s, yeah. It's 1972. So the pictures show, they are painted, they show a typical Swiss countryside and how it has changed from the 50s to the 70s. Now, can you tell what season it is in the various pictures? The first picture, it's easy, no? Spring, yes. You have the blossoming fruit tree. The second is easy again because you have the yellow leaves, it's autumn. And what about the last picture? Sorry? What?
Summer? There's also a tree with leaves.
In the last, yeah. Let's go to the last. Yeah, in the third picture is summer. You're right. There's the tree, and the last picture. Huh?
Summer. Undefined. The grass is green.
Undefined. Yes. 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 I mean, the point I want to make is that it's really difficult to tell what season it is in the last picture, because nothing much remains of nature in the picture. The meadows and fields are gone. The cows are gone. The pond and the brook are gone. All that remains really is grass, and grass is green all year round. But if you have a lot of time to study the picture, you can see it's autumn because there's this little tree on the first floor above the discount store, and it has yellow leaves. But you really have to look very closely. So when I conduct the thought experiment I ask you to conduct, when I think of my favorite places, I think of something like the first picture, among other things. In fact, the place where I live in Switzerland is a little bit still like that. If you wanted to punish me, you could take me to the highway lawn in the last picture and abandon me there for an hour or two. I really would hate this busy, noisy, stinking, ugly, known place. I would for sure not want to live in a world where this yellow, grey human crust has covered all of the Earth's surface. So this was my first example, to help you imagine what a world without natural beauty could look like and how you would think you would feel in that world. The second example is more radical. It is the American science fiction film Soylent Green from 1973, directed by Richard Fleischer. And Christoph told me about this film. I didn't know it, but then I watched it. The film, does anybody know it? Just a few. Okay, just a few people. So let me tell you briefly what this film is about. It is set in New York in the year 2022. New York is suffering from overpopulation with 40 million inhabitants in the city, pollution, depleting resources, unemployment, poverty, dying oceans, and a hot climate due to the greenhouse effect. Much of the population survives on processed food rations. One of them is Soylent Green, allegedly made of plankton. The film is about how Detective Thorne and his aged and wise friend Solomon, Sol, he's called, who remembers life before the current miserable state, find out what Soylent Green is really made of. After Detective Thorne searches the apartment of a murdered member of the board of the company which produces Soylent Green and helps himself to some of his luxury lifestyle, like real bourbon, fresh vegetables and a flank steak, Sol cooks them a dinner. Here's a quote from their conversation over dinner. You have the quote on your handout. Sol says, "Son of a bitch, I haven't eaten like this in years." Detective Thorne, "I never ate like this." Sol, "And now you know what you've been missing. There was a world once, you punk." Detective Thorne, "Yes, so you keep telling me." Sol, "I was there, I can prove it." Detective Thorne, I know, when you were young, people were better." Sol, "Oh nuts, people were always rotten, but the world was beautiful." What Sol and Detective Thorne find out is that Soylent Green is people. It is made of human remains. Unable to live with this discovery, Sol seeks assisted suicide at a government clinic called Home. The death scene, in which Sol is hygienically dispatched with the help of piped-in light classical music and movies of flowering fields and breaking waves flashed before him on a towering screen, is regarded as the best scene in the film. Ironically, the actor who played Sol died of cancer 12 days after the filming. By the way, a food substitute called Soylent is available for shipping now in the US to save you, as it says in the advertisement, the time, money and effort that usually go into preparing food. Just Google Soylent. Let me go back to the question I started with. How would a world devoid of natural beauty affect the quality of your life? Here are 3 possible answers. Am I loud enough? Yeah? A little bit more? Okay. 3 possible answers. It wouldn't affect it at all, not at all, that's the first answer. The second answer, it would affect it only marginally, and the third answer, it would affect it essentially. I put these answers on the blackboard, on the whiteboard, not at all, marginally, essentially. So I go through these answers with you. I do this slowly because I want you, after the talk, to discuss in groups which are distinguished by being answer 1, 2 or 3 together. So I go through these answers and want you to see where you would situate yourself. Answer 1. The loss of natural beauty would not affect the quality of my life at all. Natural beauty may be nice to have, a luxury from time to time, but I can live a perfectly happy life without it. There is so much else that life has to offer: romantic love, freedom, social recognition, you name it. I can do without all beauty. Really? That's the version A of this first answer. Or, I love beauty, I love beautiful music, painting and literature, but natural beauty leaves me cold, does not touch me. I'm a city dweller anyway, a wholehearted urbanist. That's B. And C, I love natural beauty, but I believe it is not that special. It is replaceable by artificial beauty. I would be just as happy reading literature instead, for example. Now, answer 2. The loss of natural beauty would affect the quality of my life, but only marginally. I love natural beauty and believe that enjoying it is an irreplaceable option for me to live well. Still, you cannot make use of all good life options. You have to make a choice. A world lacking natural beauty would be an impoverished world, like a world lacking music or painting. My life in that world could, however, still be fairly good, as I would be able to make use of other options. That's the second answer, marginally. And the third answer is the loss of natural beauty would affect the quality of my life essentially. The experience of natural beauty is a necessary part of my good life. I could not live well without it. This is Saul's attitude in the film, I guess. Saul would probably consider Detective Thorne's life as lacking, even though Thorne himself does not seem to miss anything. Thorne even suspects that Saul is nostalgic or sentimental. Remember the quote, I know, when you were young, people were better. We've had that. So Thorne even suspects that Saul is nostalgic or sentimental. Objective quality of life, like lacking something, must be distinguished from subjective good or bad feelings, like missing something. The thought experiment I asked you to perform is about objective quality of life. Would your life lack something in a world without natural beauty? And how much would be lacking? I could, of course, go on enlisting further possible answers to this question, like number 4, my life would be bad, not just no longer good, but would be really bad, or my life would be miserable. But I thought I'd stick to the 3 answers which are most probably your answers. And as I said, I would like the group discussion. In the group discussion, I would like like-minded people to get together and probe my argument in the talk from this perspective. Let's see whether it works out. My claim, the view I wish to defend in my talk, is a generalized version of position 3, namely that the experience of natural beauty is an essential part of the good human life. We humans cannot fare well in a world without natural beauty. The reason for this is that the experience of natural beauty, especially of beautiful landscapes, makes us feel at home in the world, safe and accepted. The great and irreplaceable value of beautiful landscapes lies therein. You have this claim on the handout, and I now go through the handout with you. But before, why is it so important? Before I start to go through the handout, I want to raise the question, why is it so important to try and defend this view? Why should we bother? I think it is important primarily for reasons of nature conservation. The aesthetic argument is one of the best nature conservation arguments we have. There are, to be sure, also other arguments, like the basic needs argument, we need clean air to breathe, etc., or the hedonistic argument, which concerns our wellness in nature, the soothing effect of green grass or the vitalizing effect of sunlight, for example. These are very good arguments, but the aesthetic argument is also a very good argument, and we have to try and make this argument as strong as we can. If it can be shown that natural beauty is necessary for a good human life, and if moral respect and justice plausibly require that all human beings, here and in the rest of the world, now and in the years and centuries to come, if it can be shown that cannot live a good life without natural beauty, then the case for the conservation of natural beauty and thus of nature would indeed get a powerful backing So that's the framework for why I think it's so important to talk about natural beauty. A short note about my method. I will try and defend my claim philosophically, clarifying concepts like the concept of landscape and Stimmung or atmosphere, and building step by step a rational argument in its favor. The philosophical method I employ does, of course, not deny that all our concepts are our constructions and that cultures and concepts change with history. Still, as my claim is a universal or anthropological claim, I've been looking for concepts, and I really need those concepts to defend that claim, which are universal and anthropological too. So let me go through my basic concepts to prepare the way for my argument. I will speed up now, so please fasten your seatbelts because I have only 25 minutes. First, the concept of nature. What is nature? Nature is that part of the world which has not been made by human beings but comes into existence and vanishes more or less in virtue of itself. The opposite of nature in this sense is artifact, something made by humans like tables, computers, statues, and so on. This is an old definition of nature. You can find it in Aristotle. The amount of pure nature or wilderness is rapidly decreasing in our world. Most of what we call nature, the conservation of which we are concerned about, lies in fact somewhere between the two extremes, pure nature and pure artifact. So I've visualized this. We have a whole spectrum. Pure nature, wilderness is here, and pure artifact would be here. And this does hardly exist anymore, but we should call all what is there on the spectrum, we should still employ the concept of nature for that, and here the concept. So this is the way I see the conceptual situation here. In nature, we can distinguish between natural organisms and things, like plants and rocks, on the one hand, and larger natural units, like landscapes, on the other. Landscapes are larger natural units. So what gives landscapes their unity? I think it is their atmosphere, or their character, or their Stimmung, as we say in German. The word Stimmung is untranslatable into English or French, even more untranslatable than the word Heimat, which is also important for this talk. Stimmung can refer either to moods in people, or it can refer to atmospheres, for example in landscapes or rooms or cities. So moods in people, what's an example of a mood in people? Like one example is melancholy or cheerfulness. Moods are to be contrasted with specific or general bodily feelings like specific headache or general fatigue, and they are also to be contrasted with specific emotions like anger. I'm angry about something in particular, but my cheerfulness is not about anything in particular, it is more about the world as a whole or how my life is going. Now, the problem arises how something like a landscape, which doesn't have a brain or a heart, can be cheerful or sad or melancholy. How is that possible? I think we need to explain. We need to try and explain how we can talk about the mood as atmosphere of a landscape. I distinguish in my work 4 models which try to explain this, and I opt for the expressive model, or you could also call it the metaphorical or symbolic model, to explain how Stimmung in the sense of mood is infused into landscape in the sense of atmosphere. So the expressive model says that when we perceive the Stimmung, the atmosphere of a landscape, we are perceiving what is before and around us through the metaphor of human life, human emotions, human actions. We do this on the basis of some similarities we see between us and landscapes, like between our posture or the way we move when we are in a happy mood or in an unhappy mood, or our facial expression. It's not that special. This metaphorical kind of perception is not that special. We do it all the time. Think of a jackhammer and its noise. We perceive, or often perceive, the noise as angry. Or think of you're listening to music, to the second movement. It's full of grief. I mean, there's no brain, nothing there, but still we perceive it as full of grief. Or think of architecture. There's a poor little house. It has a sad face. We do it all the time, but we do it all the time, and we are aware that this is only metaphorical. We don't really believe that this house has a brain and a heart and is really sad. And the same is the case with regard to landscapes. This expressive model has to be distinguished from other models, as I said. For example, the causal model, which is, I guess, the one most people would, at least at first, find convincing. The causal model says that when you say a landscape is peaceful, what you really mean is that it makes you peaceful. When you sit there or walk around there, it makes you peaceful, and then you project your feelings on the landscape. Or associative model. What you really mean when you say a landscape is peaceful is that it makes you think, associate peaceful things, nice memories. The expressive model is different from these two, and it's also different from the animistic model, which nobody really holds, but it's good to have it in the picture. The animistic model would think that there really is something which can feel spirits or fairies or whatever. I mean, little children seem to have this kind of relation to landscapes and trees and all that, but when they grow older, of course, they know that there is not really something. So the expressive model, I think, is the best model. Now I move on to the fourth basic concept, aesthetic experience. What is aesthetic experience? I think aesthetic experience is the sympathetic contemplation of something for its own sake and not just for some other reason. Like what? Like hedonistic experience. When I look at something because I want to feel good, then I'm directed towards my own feelings. Aesthetic experience, in contrast, is really directed to what I look at, and it's an intrinsic activity. It's directed at something else, and I'm active in my brain. My senses are active, my imagination is active because I'm using metaphors, as I said. My imagination is active, but also my heart is active. I'm emotionally involved. I move along in sympathy with what is before me. Or think of a novel, you move along with Anna Karenina through what happens to her. So it's an emotional, it's also an emotional reaction. As social beings, we enjoy this kind of sympathetic coordination with something. A paradigm case of this is dancing. Why do we like to dance? Because we really enjoy moving in coordination with others. Perfect coordination or resonance feels like unity, although it is, strictly speaking, nothing but perfect coordination. As Martin Buber knows when he writes about the mystic, I give you a quote from I and Thou. What the ecstatic man calls union is the enrapturing dynamic of relation, not a unity arisen in this moment of the world's time that dissolves the I and Thou, but the dynamic of relation itself, which can put itself before its bearers as they steadily confront one another and cover each other the feeling of the other enraptured one. Here, then, on the brink, the relational act goes beyond itself. The relation itself, in its vital unity, is felt so forcibly that its parts seem to fade before it, and in the force of its life, the I and thou between which it is established are forgotten. So perfect coordination feels like unity, but it is really perfect coordination between I and thou. The fifth concept, beauty. In a very general sense, we call something beautiful when it invites and rewards this kind of aesthetic, sympathetic contemplation. And the last concept, natural beauty. What is so special about natural beauty? I would like to point to two things. One is nature is variable. Think of night and day, sun and rain, winter, spring, summer and fall. And the second point is that nature is something which is contingent, has a contingency, a self-sufficiency. It is just there, it has a there-ness. I like a quote from Nietzsche, which talks about why we like to be in nature, and it says, wir sind so gern in der Natur, weil die Natur keine Meinung über uns hat. So we like to be in nature because nature doesn't have an opinion about us. This is self-sufficient, it is different, it is just there. Okay, now I've gone with you through 6 important basic concepts. I've done, I hope, all the way to prepare my argument, and the argument now is the following. The aesthetic experience of beautiful landscapes immerses us in the world we feel at one with, in union with, or at home in it, safe and accepted. No artificial substitute can connect us in this way to the world out there. Beautiful landscapes are irreplaceable in that they fulfill our longing to be part of the natural world, the world which is just there, which comes into being and vanishes in virtue of itself. Beautiful landscapes heal the rift between subject and nature. They teach us how to dwell on earth, as Martin Heidegger puts it. So, no artificial substitute can connect us in this way to the world out there. Still, art may teach us how to better, fuller, keener and deeper experience natural beauty. And here I have a quote on the handout from the English philosopher Roger Scruton. Read you the quote. We encounter works of art as perfected icons of our felt potential and appropriate them in order to bring form, lucidity and self-knowledge to our inner life. I have an example on the handout, Michael Donhauser's first poem in his Variationen in Prosa from 2013 and from last year, in English translation. From this poem I took the title of my talk. The poem starts with, "And what was there accepted us." And now I jump to the end of the poem, where it says, "And look, how by the lake we stood in the light, the clusters full, and the day all but embracing us, benign, its arms as if in drunken blossom, sinking, sweet and soft." Allow me 2 last remarks. One is that not all landscapes, of course, are as paradisiacal as the one described enacted in this poem. When I talk about feeling at home in nature, I don't have only these paradisiacal landscapes in view. I also think of sublime landscapes as extreme and slightly irritating cases of the world in which we can still feel at home. And the second remark is that I've been talking only about landscapes, about nature out there, but I think what I want to say also has some relevance about the nature in us, our own nature. For when we go along with the Stimmungen of landscapes, be it under the guidance of art or not, we put ourselves into a direct relation to our own creatureliness. We are gaining a grounding Stimmung that is commensurate with the basic conditions of having been born and having to die. A grounding Stimmung that carries and modulates our psychic activities in their entirety. That's what Stimmungen do. They modulate us. In a purely artificial world, by contrast, we run the risk of losing our humaneness. We are threatened by an oblivion of and alienation from being. We are in need of nature so that we do not forget what it means to be a part of nature as a human. The experience of beautiful nature is a necessary constituent of a good human life.